for days, chaos in Peru. Roadblocks on fire as protesters throw rocks and sticks at police. Authorities shooting tear gas into crowds as they march towards the legislative palace in Lima. A growing tension as President Pedro Castillo imposed a curfew Tuesday to quell recent anti-government protests over rising gas and food prices.
Hago un llamado a la calma, a la serenidad. La protesta social es un derecho constitucional, pero debe hacerse dentro del marco de la ley.
Less than 24 hours later, amid escalating manifestations, that curfew dropped.
Lo único que podemos hacer ahorita es unirnos y salir todos adelante.
Cansados del mal manejo, cansados de que nos esté gobernando alguien que no sabe gobernar.
The government confirming at least 4 people have died, 3 of them over the weekend in the city of Huancayo, inland where protests began.
La policía ha manejado con mucho tino para evitar costo social. Sin embargo, se ha producido 3 muertes, pero no por la policía.
The outrage over the government's response to protests, another hit for the man who came in promising economic stability and was just elected last June. In less than a year in office, he's already faced 2 impeachments. President Castillo's curfew and handling of the deadly protests raising concerns about rights violations. The country's national coordinator for human rights saying the state of emergency violates Peruvians' rights and accusing the national police of using disproportionate force against protesters. It's a delicate topic that for many Peruvians brings back memories of 1992. And amid social and economic unrest, since jailed former President Alberto Fujimori shut down Peru's Congress and judicial system and sent tanks into the streets.
What do you think it was about the curfew specifically that made the Peruvian people say, okay, that's it?
Oh, well, first of all, not even in the worst times of COVID, not even in the worst years of terrorism, which Peru has been through, decades ago, was there this 24-hour shutdown with no preparation. So this was clearly seen as a reaction by a president who didn't know what else to do.
Inflation has been an issue in Peru for years. One worsened recently with the war in Ukraine, hitting a 26-year high in March. Before the curfew, the government proposed dropping most fuel taxes in an attempt to lower prices, while also raising the minimum wage about 10%. Those protesting saying it's not enough.
There had been work stoppages and there had been roadblocks before the curfew, but the reaction has just emboldened those who were protesting. And I really feel that it was a measure that not only is the president surely deeply regretting, but that it may actually be a turning point downward for this government.
All right, Issa joins us now live in studio. Issa, a lot to talk about here. So the president, who's been described as center-left, has had a really rough go. You mentioned the 2 impeachments, but you were just telling me this curfew actually made things so much worse. It's been lifted now. Are things any better?
They're not, Tom. That's the short answer. Cynthia from the university there in Lima told us that this is really just going to continue to go downhill in her opinion. She does not expect things to quiet down. They have not in the last 24 hours. She especially does not expect things to quiet down for the president. She says that there have been calls for him to resign already, not only from members of the opposition, but from members of the government who used to support him, who voted for him to not get impeached the last 2 times, who are now saying that they're fed up and they're going against him as well. Cynthia said that she suspects this could possibly even end in a 3rd impeachment. That would truly be historic, Tom. Again, that would be the 3rd impeachment in less than a year. He just came into office last summer. So too early to tell right now if that's how this will end up, but we'll
Moving on, in October, farmers in the Netherlands took a stand against the government's green crackdown on the agricultural industry by gridlocking motorways, you'll remember, with thousands of tractors in peak hour traffic. The Dutch government, however, has not listened to the farmers and is now about to shut down, wait for this, 3,000 farms. They're going to close down. This is World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab stuff on steroids. 3,000 farms are going to be shut down in a bid to comply with EU emissions standards. Ooh, methane. Ooh, nitrogen in the soil. Ooh, Chris Bowen. The effects of this scheme are going to be devastating for farmers, but it looks to be it's only the first step in what the EU are planning. Ralph Schulhammer is an assistant professor in economics and political science at Webster University, and he joins us now. Ralph, great to see you again. This is getting out of hand. The WEF crowd, your Prime Minister over there, shutting down 3,000 farms, and we also learn that in Germany they're talking of stopping German farmers fertilizing their farms. I mean, this is insanity, isn't it, Ralph?
No, it is. And I think what we see is the Dutch are doing to the agricultural sector what the Germans did to the energy sector, and we all saw the consequences there. So we get the promises that, oh, this is not going to be a problem. We're going to move to alternative modes of production, be it energy or agriculture. And in the end, they never work. I mean, you just mentioned the Germans. I mean, there's even more insanity. They want to become 30% of their agriculture to go organic, which means they would turn from a net exporter of agriculture to a net importer of agriculture, which is in times of global insecurity, I mean, we saw this with Russian gas, is complete insanity. And of course, the Dutch are doing the same, because these 3,000 farms is only the beginning. And the Dutch government is saying this. They said, oh, we're going to have to do much more in this respect. And it has to be stressed also for your viewers, nitrogen is an absolutely crucial ingredient for synthetic fertilizer. And without synthetic fertilizer, we could not feed the world. If we would not have it, about 4 billion people simply would have no access to food. So this is a war in many ways, I would argue, against humanism. It's a war against humanity, and most of it is by ideological goals, because I looked at the science. It is not clear that nitrogen really has the effect that the Dutch government claims. And even more importantly, the Dutch farmers are reducing the nitrogen use. So this is not that they're oblivious to these problems, but now they are pushed to do it faster and faster, because the dominant ideology, or I'm tempted to call it the cultish ideology, tells us if you don't change now, the world is going to end in 10 years, which of course it's not.
And they've learned nothing, obviously, from what we saw in Sri Lanka when they went organic, yes. and people started not having enough food to eat.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is part of a larger story. I mean, remember Sri Lanka, if you go back 2 years, everybody was cheering them on. Sri Lanka, they show the way forward. Sri Lanka knows how to do this. They proved to the world that, in fact, you don't need fertilizer. You don't need any kind of synthetic materials to feed your population. And then it all broke down in a very, very short order. And because you cannot feed your people. Modern agriculture is an absolute necessity, given the population numbers we have. And I think this is overall a larger part of a kind of autoimmune disease the West is afflicted by it, where we turn against everything that made our civilization powerful, right? It's energy. You can't do nuclear, which probably was the greatest scientific breakthrough in the 20th century, right? You can't do modern agriculture. And it goes further than this, right? We see this like a couple of days ago, the EU is threatening Elon Musk to ban Twitter. They have nothing to say about TikTok, which is basically a Chinese data mining operation, but they say, oh, we're gonna ban Twitter. You guys don't censorship. So everything that kind of made the West, we are currently at war against. And just to add on to this is part of the program, because I just want to remind everyone, when Greta Thunberg, and I had her big book party of her new book, she openly said, so for me, it's no longer just about a climate, just about the environment. Now it's about changing the system. The Western capitalist system has to go, and this is the actual agenda.
And I mean, and Ralph, that's sort of my next question here. You know, you said that the ideological goals are sort of about climate, and they say saving the planet, but how much of that is really just a cover for what is essentially, I think, a Marxist ideology, but also one that looks at a first world of Europe and Australia and America that is prosperous and has a prosperous middle class, and says that's a problem. We actually want people to be dependent on the state, on the government, and because they have too much, because right now all of this prosperity creates independence and too much free thought and a lot of other things.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I would add to this when we say, so why can we say that it is ideological? Let me give you one quick example. The European Union is now planning to fine the French 500 million euros because they didn't build enough renewables. However, the French emissions in electricity production are the lowest, among the lowest in the world, because they had so much nuclear. So they achieved the low emissions goal, but didn't build enough photovoltaic and solar, so they get punished, which shows you that this is more about the altar of solar and wind at which they worship, than it is about actually reducing emissions. The other point about the Marxism, I'm not so sure. I mean, it's for me, it's less Marxism than it is a kind of secular coming of a new form of reformation. If you listen to how they talk, it's about, society needs to be cleansed. We need to change our ways of life. This sounds more like the Puritans, I would argue, than the Marxists, right? It's about we need to eat less meat and we need to take fewer showers. And so it's all about society needs to go a baptism of fire to cleanse ourselves from the sins of the past.
But it's also...
This is a quasi-religious movement.
But Ralph, it's also fascism, if you ask me. I mean, fascism is the marriage of authoritarian governments and big business, big corporations, and we're seeing that. One of the bizarre anomalies here, which just does not make any sense, food prices are up by about 20% in Europe. So you're seeing food prices going up, but the EU is trying to reduce the amount of food being produced. Now, you don't even have to be an economic genius to figure out that that is going to push food prices up even further. So this is a suicide note, what they're embarking on. Who is behind this, and more importantly, who is resisting this?
Well, I think the problem is it's pressure from two sides, right? I think because you mentioned fascism, but the thing about fascism is fascism came, in uniforms and jackboots, right? This was really kind of top-down, forcefully, pushed down upon people. This is more insidious because you see this also in the United States a little bit. Now you have all these subsidies. So you subsidize the green economy, you subsidize all these things. So you pour money into a kind of macroeconomic Ponzi scheme, and this will go on for a while because, of course, many people say, well, if they who seem to know better or claim to know better are making sure that we still get more money, right? People are less, let's say, inclined to resist. I mean, this is all going to blow up at some point, and you mentioned it correctly. I mean, this is what we see currently in Europe. Right? There's every month we hear this is going to be peak inflation, and the next month is this is going to be peak inflation, and we've reached a point where we say, oh, 8% inflation, what a great success. I mean, no, that is not a great success. Sure, it's not 15%, but it's still bad. So I think that the resistance is still not where it is supposed to be, because the problem is that everybody who is behind this or supports this, of course, is at the levels of power at the universities, in media, in culture. I mean, it's very difficult to raise your voice against this. I mean, I work at a university. I have to tread carefully here. I mean, I'm very lucky that my university allows me to do this. But this is really, given its puritanic ideological content, right? You really run the risk of being burned at the metaphorical stake if you try to resist these programs.
Absolutely. Ralph Schellhammer, well, we'll speak to you again soon, and we don't want to see you or us on that stake, but we'll all be there together, mate.